So, a lot of people, make comments that I build everything out of yellow concrete, and they said it's weird, or they make fun of it, like you're not gonna make it yellow. Something like, I mean, I like it. You put your redstone on it, and it's nice and. But I want the community to be happy. I like my viewers and all that stuff. So I guess from now on, I'll just build everything with dirt. At least it's cheap. Let's get to it. Just kidding. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. In the last video, I promised that if I went over the timer that I would make 6 dirt cheap farms. I went over the timer by a lot. And I keep my promises. So behind me right here, this one doesn't count because we already talked about this in the, the bamboo creating wood in 120 video. We're going to get to that. And in the counting video, if you watch that, you may have seen what were the rules for what does dirt cheap mean. So I'm going to cover that in just a moment. First things first, there is going to be a world download down in the description for this where you can get all the farms that you're going to see and either recreate them yourself, make changes, grab your Lightmatics, all that kind of thing. So if you've already seen this in the counting video and you want to skip this, you want to get to a specific farm, look down the video description. There will be timestamps that should also show up on your player bar on YouTube where you can go to look what you're looking for. But for those of you that haven't heard us talk about this yet, let's talk about what dirt cheap means. So on the wall here, we have a series of materials that can be quote-unquote considered expensive when used in technical builds. Things like obsidian, you need to have your diamond pickaxe to get it. You need to find the lava. Obviously, in late game, this is not a problem because you're already built up there. Mid game, also not a problem either. But in the early game, that can be really difficult to get. We have things for silk touch, things like ice, coral fans, and budding amethyst. Those require silk touch in order to get. So now not only do you have to have your good pickaxe, but you have to have your silk touch pickaxe. So we don't want to use things like ice for water streams, for item streams, amethyst buds for alignment, coral fans for TNT duping. We have quartz, which can only be obtained in the nether. You can either mine it or barter for it in the nether, but you can't get it outside of the nether, and that is a key component of observers and comparators. These ones are really the things that hurt because without using observers and comparators, they have a lot of very unique functions specific to them that are difficult to replace. So things can get a little complicated there. Why would you not want to go to the nether? I don't know, like we talked about before. Maybe you're either in a personal challenge where you don't have access to nether, like you're doing some sort of skyblock thing, something like that. Or you're, like I said, you're just scared of the nether. It's an early hardcore game. It's a hardcore server. You don't want to risk it in the nether. We're going to have to come up with some alternatives for these types of things. And then also things like soul sand, bubble evaders. Doesn't really matter. We can do other types of item elevators, but we're excluding any nether materials from this whatsoever. That also includes any materials from the end, so any shulker shells. And then slime, we've talked about, even though slime's not that expensive, you can go to a swamp and hunt some slime, get yourself a few stacks. Once you start getting into it, or you're, once again, early game, it may be difficult to find a slime, especially if you're not seed hunting and you're not looking up your seed. And then that means you can't make any sticky pistons. So sometimes instead of slime blocks, we can use honey blocks, but we're excluding that too because it means you have to go find the bees, you have to stick around where the bees are, and you have to farm the bees. So we're going to stay away from any materials that are on this list, and we're going to try and make it cheap as possible, and I mean dirt cheap. Now, technically, dirt isn't that cheap because there aren't really many good farms for it. Azalea added an option for it, and hint, hint, if you look in the video description, there might be one of those coming in this video. But it's not specifically that we want to build things out of dirt. I did some of these for the meme of building it dirt cheap out of dirt, and we're going to look at a dirt cheap dirt farm made out of dirt. But the idea is we're trying to make these as accessible as possible without having to do any of those dangerous things, using materials that you can have laying around from just a mining session down in the caves when you're, out mining for diamonds or iron. Obviously, iron and redstone dust, those are completely available to us. So we're going to be using things like pistons. So if you're at a certain stage in Skyblock, some of these probably still aren't applicable because Acapulco? Still applicable because you need the cobblestone in those, and the latest meta for Skyblock is... Anywho, let's get back to talking about the farms. So we're going to be looking at 11 farms here. Some of them are going to be really good outputs, something that can stand up in your mid game, even maybe your late game. But again, observers and sticky pistons kind of make things a lot easier. But you'd still be able to use these designs. Other ones are going to be really low output, where it's, you know, maybe it's only situational use, but I was having so much fun with this project. Like I said, I did 11 instead of 6, so I still wanted to include them. So let's get to it. When you open the world download, this is what you are going to get. You're going to get all the farms lined up in a row here, so you're going to be able to have access to them. On screen right now, I'm going to put the list of all the farms that we're going to be going through, so you're going to be able to see these on here. So some of these are going to be really good output. Like I said, some of them are going to be kind of bad output, but at the same time are still functional farms. Full disclosure, the Birch farm and the Mangrove farm each do use a few sticky pistons. We'll get to that individually as to why, but at some points there were just no ways around that. So those two farms are using a total of 12 sticky pistons between the two of them. So the Birch is using 8, and then the Mangrove farm is using 4. We'll get to that later. Technically broke the rules, but even if you take this out, it's still 9, so I'm not breaking my promise. But now let's look into each one of these individually, starting with Bonemeal. So this right here is a moss-based Bonemeal design, and this uses all of our cheapskate techniques, basically. This started out from, after the bamboo video, we were talking in my Discord of, I wonder if there are any bamboo farms you can do that use all those kind of cheapskate materials and cheapskate tricks. And we were, talking about using Bonemeal for it and the moss-based Bonemeal, but then we kind of dropped it off. But a user on my Discord, yet another Emily, actually found another Bonemeal design online, and they went through and made some changes to make it cheapskate. Changing things like the timer to not use comparators and observers, and that type of thing, changing it over. And it was fine, it made Bonemeal, it just wasn't that fast. But it gave me an idea to do this, and then it kind of got out of hand. So this is not using any of those original design concepts anymore. I did, take a couple of things out of the timer that yet another Emily did. So we just have a basic timer. We're going to get into this a little bit more in detail. But this is basically a moss farm that does what we expect. It bonemeals some moss above some stone that's getting pushed in from stone generators. The moss or the stone gets converted to moss and then broken and gets put into composters. The output of those composters gets fed back to the dispensers that are bone mealing, and then the extra is output. That is your profit. Not only did we have to cheapen up the circuitry on the timings and everything, but at the same time, we also needed to increase the rates of this bone meal system. So an output of about 200 per hour is not that much. This one right here is 2.2K. So a lot of the stone generators that are, cheap, easy to set up, they're this kind of system where they have water on two sides. That water then flows underneath lava before the lava flows down. Then the lava flows down and makes the stone. So we can see when we pull the pistons back, the water flows underneath. And then we get stone all the way across because that lava has spread all the way across. Then the pistons push it out, and it waits to get it ready for another cycle for the lava to flow, and then boom, we go down. We can see it flowing in there. This does have a problem, though, because as we can see, it is successfully making stone, no cobblestone. But this is important because moss cannot convert cobblestone to moss. So if we got into a place where we were hitting a push limit on a couple of these, so let's say, these areas didn't fully convert to moss, so that moss is already broken. When we go to push out, what's going to happen is that water is not going to flow all the way back because we can see we've already got some stone sticking behind. So I'm going to pull this lever back, and we're going to get stone on the sides, but then when I push out again, we're getting nothing in that middle now. Alternatively, if the edges are what has hit push limit, and then we go to push it, obviously those don't push out, well, now there's no more water flowing underneath those to get to it. So these can create some really tricky situations where you're not getting the stone that you actually need, or it could make some cobblestone. And so that's why usually setups like this are done, where the stone actually gets created with flowing water sources on each side, so that, even if this is the only stone that pushes out, there's still water here that can get in there underneath the lava. But what we're using sticky pistons to then pull that down and then pistons on the side to push it out. So once I flick this lever, those sticky pistons are going to pull down, those will push out, and then we have room for a new one. I'll undo that. And now those sticky pistons are ready to pull out the next stone block. But again, what if we want to do that without the sticky pistons? This is the concept behind the module that we're going to be using for the Bonemeal farm here. So I put in glass just so we can see there that we have waterlogged stairs here. That's not actually cobblestone. And that waterlogged stair will then let water flow underneath. But then the problem is once we push that, that's going to just stay in that position. So we need to be able to push it out again. We can't push it out this way because we need to have the waterlog there. So we need to get it up, but then that means if we had the lava one lower, then the stone is going to knock out the lava. So what we actually have is we have the lava flow down twice. So it flows down to this block. There's water then flowing here, then it flows down to this block, and then it's going to create our stone source and we can push it out. So again, we've seen this monostable circuit before in the talk of cheapskates. Basically, send a redstone signal in. This gets powered. That powers this piston, pushes the block up, which means this block is no longer there to send power through. So you just get a stable pulse, just a nice quick pulse on this other side. So when I push that button, we're going to see this is going to get pushed up and then over. Now it's going to flow down again. Unfortunately, you saw how painfully slow that was. So that means if we want to get this back to the normal speed, we need to come in from both sides. So in this version here, we have generators on both sides, and they're going to be then sending in. So even though we're going to be sending in half the amount of time, we're sending in from both sides, so it's going to be the same amount of time. Now that means that we can use just a standard little repeater clock here, and what this is doing, here's your on-off lever. So it turns it on, it's going to give a delay here, but it's going to push this up. So now we're going to have 4 blocks with repeaters facing into them. They're just going to clock. This turns it monostable, so it's going to be a short pulse that's going through this. And then here we have T flip-flops that are going to go back and forth. So each time this goes off, it's going to go back and forth. It's only going to be able to send a signal through every other time. So in this position, it won't send a signal through. In this position, it will be able to send a signal through this block. And that way we can use the same timer to just push everything through, because again, we need to wait for 2 lava flowing cycles. If you have access to a lava source in your world, you do not need to do this lava bridge. I just did this to show that we can use just 1 lava for this module and have it flow down to everything. It's easy, just take out everywhere that the yellow glass is here and put your lava right where it's actually flowing down onto. And again, there is nowhere in here that this glass is required except for 2 blocks. This one right here, because there's a torch underneath there, and then this one right here. Now this could be glass, this could be stairs, this could be any transparent block that's not going to send a redstone signal through it. The rest of it, I'm just using it so that we can see what's going on. For example, down here I have a lot of glass underneath, and whoops. That's just so we can see how items are going to move. This could all be dirt, just like we're going to see over there. So what's going to happen when we bone meal that moss block underneath is we're going to get moss on top. Now we need to get rid of everything on top and then collect all the blocks that are going to get punched out. That's what we have this water system for. But the water system, we don't want to interfere with being able to grow moss, and we just need it to be short enough that it can just flush everything into this central waterway right here. Well, we can't use a comparator pulse extender, so what we have here is, once again, so the T flip-flop signal that's going into these piston setups, we're then using that again into another T flip-flop. So this is going to go off every 2, then this goes off every 4, basically, and that's what releases the water. So we're pushing in 4 pieces of stone, 2 on each side, and then releasing the water and rebone mealing. What we have here is we have a perfect little circuit where just this repeater is going to lock this repeater. If you're not familiar with repeater locking, definitely check that out. If you lock a repeater by putting a repeater into the side, it will hold its state. So even if we send a short pulse into this, if we then lock it, it's going to stay on. And then that just feeds onto these trapdoors on both sides and releases the water. So enough yammering, let's turn it on and see how this is functioning. So we can see that timer is going to go around. It's going to push in stone from each side. And then it rebone meals and the water releases to push everything in there. Now in this version here, it's properly alternating each side it goes. It doesn't really matter as long as we have both sides firing. So we could have eliminated like this T flip-flop here and just recycle the signal back over to this side and then still be able to use the 4. Yeah, this was just much easier to actually get built. So all the bone meal gets pushed into this trench where it flows down into this other waterway. This other waterway is going on top. And let me turn sounds down a little bit. This is flowing over a series of hoppers that are facing into the composters. Those composters, when they fill up, the bone meal comes back under here. We have it feeding into a dropper. And that on-off switch that we turned on also feeds down here, and it turns on this 8-game tick clock. So this is going to be a very popular usage in this one, where we just have 2 torches that go back and forth between burning out. A lot of times in these downloads, you're actually going to see 3 torches, like I'm going to add there. I'm going to take that one off because this position was stable. But some of these positions, based on redstone update order, it can actually be really finicky about which other torch is going to update. So sometimes this will be off, this will burn out, and this will stay off. But we can see right now what they're doing is updating each other. So this is just constantly shooting out any bone meal that comes into it instead of having to add a comparator onto it. Check the signal. We're just always releasing what's in there. And then we're just shooting it into water sources. So this is just a column of water sources. It's not a bubble vader, and you can see it's a little bit slower, but it still gets the job done. We then align the bone meal using these chests. It can align up with this hopper here, and then flows over to this other hopper. Anything that's left over then falls into this green line, which is just your output. So right here is where your profit comes. So a lot of this is pretty straightforward, not much different than as bone meal farms exist. So you can see what I was talking about here. Here we have stone blocks that weren't able to push out on the sides, so those stayed in a position and lava didn't fall in and create stone, but we are still having water flow into the sides here and create stone where it needs to be. So again, this is using 0 nether materials, this is using 0 sticky pistons, this is using 0 sticky blocks, anything like that. No silk touch. This is dirt cheap. So you can see I'm literally putting redstone lines on dirt. Do I recommend that? No, because dirt, you actually have to go out and dig. But, you'll have tons of cobble laying around, or you can do, just planks. Obviously don't use planks to flow the lava because that'll backfire. And then also underneath everything in the clock. So we're just taking everything off of that central clock, sending in signals through. Again, there's a couple of places where we turn it into a monostable signal. We just have to make sure that if we're going to use that monostable signal coming out of the block without a repeater, so it's just dust coming out of the block, that we repeat it at some point, because most of the time it's not going to actually be enough to update whatever you want to power then. So we just need to have that repeater so it's a long enough signal that it carries over and is able to actually update. One thing to note on there is we do have hopper minecarts that are slid into these moss blocks. So if I turn on my hitboxes there, we can see there's a hopper minecart in there. Normally, in order to get a block inside of a hopper minecart, you would 1-tick pulse it or short tick pulse it using a piston. But we can't do that with moss. So when you need to get a hopper minecart into a moss block, it's pretty easy. All we need to do is just put rails there, and then we want to curve that rail into this. If you place it on top, you'll see it'll curve right in, but obviously rails can't curve going upwards. And then when we put on our hopper minecart and push it in, it'll glitch right into that block. So that's the way we're going to be using to get these in. You can actually then kind of push it up closer to the block as well. So it's just lined up there nicely. And what that's going to do is that's going to catch everything that gets broken. So we have moss that generates things like carpet, azaleas, grass. We need to punch that out if we want this to create more moss blocks into the stone. So I have this piston punch it out, but then this hopper minecart collects it, sends it into its own composter. So even though it's not a great output, it's still some bone meal. And so going back into the system itself is going to then get you more bone meal out. So we might as well. But if you want to skip this step of the hopper minecart, this composter right here, these 2 hoppers, you're short on iron, you can just skip this whole thing, take this out, and have this go directly into the dropper instead of going through this system. Now, as far as scaling it up to be 18,000 per hour, that is actually pretty simple. We basically just stack the modules and add repeaters there so the signal keeps going through. And boom, now we've got 18,000 per hour. So we're going to be going through the one on the left because, again, I did use some glass blocks. It was easier to see through. The one here on the right, you can see, is made entirely of dirt. So you can see where all those, solid blocks need to be. We don't need any of those glass blocks. And then the one right next to it, it's going to be same concepts. We're not really going to go over that. That's 9,000 per hour, so it's just half of the modules. Like I said, everything on the top is pretty much going to remain the same. We're going to use the same exact clock to send out the signals to both sides. The only difference is on this side, like we talked about earlier, you don't actually have to have those alternate like that. So this side, they're just going off at the same time. We're going to see how that's going to look. So we can see as I'm running this now, there went the water. It's going to do a new bone meal, but we can see that the right side is going left and right, left and right. The left side is both going at the same time. Doesn't really matter which way it goes there. And then it just goes all the way down to do that. Now, the only difference in this with using modules is what we do underneath. So first we have all the output, all the moss blocks, the azalea, the seeds, and all that come into the same water stream. And we're using this water stream system here so we don't have to use any ice. We can see right here, normally when you have a break in your water, let's say the water is running out or you need to have a break in the water, you just have the item go in there and then it flows over the ice, no problem, continues on to the next one. But what happens when you don't have that? Well, what we can do is we can line up the item so its center is right on here, so that once it reaches the end of here, its other half is touching this water and then can keep going. The walls are going to give it room so that it's not going to block anything, and here we're just going to use the chest to align it. So I'll turn on my hitboxes here, shoot it out, and we can see there it's going to be touching water both directions down. So you can just keep this going one after the other and send it all the way down a line without using any ice. Obviously, it takes a little more space. It takes a little bit more water, but you know, who cares? So we can have all the output coming down the same area so that we can centralize it. Since they're already pre-aligned, we can have them come over this series of hoppers that are facing into composters. And then those composters we just have facing into a few droppers. Now, this is probably a little bit extra composters, but as you can see, they are getting used all the way down on the end. So did still include those. It's just going to be rare that those get used. So here we have 4 droppers that are just spitting all the bone meal into the same stream. Once again, we have just a torch burnout clock that is doing a 4-game tick pulse, so it's always able to release its bone meal when it's done. And then we just have slabs here so that we're not powering those hoppers. So the ones facing into the droppers are going to get some powering, but at that point, they're already facing into the dropper. And we have all the bone meal coming here, and then it falls down into this stream. So this is, once again, a water stream that is an elevator that's not using any soul sand. So all we have is we have a break here where we're stopping the water, and then a little drop down. We can see all the bone meal is getting caught onto that trap door there, that waterlogged trap door. The nice thing about this is actually it actually batches up for us. Now, as far as item lag, it's not that much of a help because you can see it's a little bit slower going up. But for hopper cooldown, it is actually really nice because then it's already coming through in batches. And then we just use the same concept with the waterway. This one, we're just going, every other side because we don't have another side to come in on. So we line it up using a chest. That way it is partially over that hopper. We turn my hitboxes back on. We can see it's right over that hopper. So when each one of these modules needs to pick up more bone meal, it's just going to go around the whole system here, feed any hoppers that need it. And then once again, anything coming past this point is your profit. So since this is 18K, if you want to have it go into hoppers for storage, you're going to need 2 hoppers at least. Here in this system, I just had 1 because I was just testing the output with carpet mod. But this is where you put your chests, so you have your 2 hoppers that can handle that 18,000 output. Or you could do something like line up a hopper minecart underneath this line over 2 hoppers. But you're going to need the 2 hoppers, whatever you want to do to handle 18,000 items per hour, because each hopper can only handle 9,000 per hour. And that's really it. So again, super cheap materials, no nether materials, no silk touch, anything like that. Perfect for your hardcore world where you don't want to do too much dangerous adventuring. And then, like I said, this version is just all dirt to show that we don't actually need any glass. So everywhere where there is just dirt. I don't recommend this. Don't build with wool because that's just going to burn. But, you can build it out of some other block that doesn't actually burn. And I guess we didn't actually need those. We can see this is the one that's going to run around in the circle. And then over here, this is the 9K per hour one. This is, since we're not going to have access to, netherrack or soul sand. I know you can find netherrack at abandoned portals, but again, maybe you're not a big adventurer, you're staying close to base and all that. So we just wanted to have this. You can throw it into a cactus, but then we have all of our output from this one is coming into here. So even though this is only 9K an hour, we still want to make sure we have 2 hoppers because it's not going to be consistent, like split up evenly per second over that 9K. So you're going to get batches of this. So we still have 2 hoppers to make sure we can handle that. So that's it for the bone meal farms. You may have noticed when we flew through this one, there's actually the micro bamboo farm from the other video here. So this one is kind of cheating a little bit because I already showed this, but there was no world download. But basically you can use that 18K bone meal here to make 18K bamboo per hour. This one is real simple. All we're doing is we're having a bone meal that goes into this dispenser right here. You just want to make sure that once again, you have 2 hoppers feeding in. And then we have our torch burnout clock for our 4-game tick speed. That is going to then grow the bamboo, break it. It's going to drop into the hopper minecart. We have it on top of mud. So it's technically available to those hoppers. Each one of those hoppers can suck out items. This one can send through there, this one can send to there, and then we get 18k bone meal per hour. The cool thing about this is if you build this inside spawn chunks, it can run forever. You don't need a player there, anything. There is nothing in this bone meal farm that requires a player to be nearby for it to run. It just requires that the game has it loaded. So something like in spawn chunks, or, you know, I say chunk loader line, but at that point, if you have a chunk loader line, do you really need the dirt cheap version? But then same thing with the bamboo. Anything that we're bone mealing out of a dispenser, you know, this we don't need the player to replace any bamboo because it's just this piece growing back up. So this can be left alone too. So if you take this and this, build that in your spawn chunks in 120, you're going to have tons of free wood. Now, I know a lot of people in last video and some other videos I've seen talking about the bamboo are saying that it's completely overpowered. I don't think it's overpowered because you're just getting planks out of it, and it's a 4x4 recipe. So think of it this way. An entire shulker box of bamboo right here. So entire shulker box is this many logs equivalent. You could probably get that in like a minute of chopping trees with a wooden axe. It's fine. However, if you don't want to use bamboo for wood, you want to stick with your tree farms, this is a version of the early game tree farm, and what I did is I took it and I made it even cheaper. Once again, clock systems are just using, you know, dropping sand. This is once again where we do have a few sticky pistons. This vertical double piston extender, I could extend it down with regular pistons, but then can't push it back up because trees have restrictions of what blocks they can have around them. Same thing with the sticky pistons back here pushing the logs. The tree has this rule of a 5x5 area, so we have the area where the trunk's going to grow. 3x3, where the trunk's going to grow right here, and then we have the logs here that they don't count because they're already a log. And yeah, if we had pistons here, then just tree would never grow. So this would just be a bone meal waster farm. So I'm not going to go over too many details of this. I did talk about this a lot in that original video, so you can go check out that early game tree farm if you want to see that. But all I did here was I just added on like another T flip-flop there we can see, and that's just going to then dispense out TNT every other log that drops down. So this one would require you to use some TNT. Now, I did find online a TNT duper that is not going to use any observers, any slime, any fans, or any sticky pistons. We're going to get to that in one of these designs coming up. But again, I don't want to just overspam that because it's not my design. And you guys know me. I prefer to just use my designs as much as possible. So you can see we got rid of all the observers. We're just using monostable circuit here. And we're using a 4-game tick clock. Here we have this going back and forth. Again, if you're running into issues with this not running because of positionality in your world, you just boom, plop one there, plop another block there, and then that powers itself. Now that being said, having the actually 9 sticky pistons, I forgot we extended this to 7, but having the 9 sticky pistons, so that's 9 slime balls is the only expense you need from this. This gets you 13,000 birch logs per hour, or if you turn on the oak switch and run oak, 8,000 oak logs per hour. So having this little tiny setup, it still beats the bamboo on, you know, massive wood needs. But if you just, you know, you want a medium amount of wood, that can still get you there. The nice thing about what we're going to be talking about here is these are all going to be designs that use bone meal. So they're all going to be based on these bone meal modules right here. So all you need to do is build that bone meal module, and either, you know, you can add on more chests here if you want to build that bone meal somewhere and make this tree farm somewhere else. Add on series of chests and have them feeding in, and I'm actually going to have this feed in at double speed just so we know we've always got it available to keep that speed up, and then just add on your stack of chests, however you want to stack those chests, and fill in your bone meal that way. That's up to you. But you're going to see the theme of everything is going to come back to needing bone meal. Next up, I know tall flower farms, nothing new. Dispenser with bone meal facing into it makes 18,000 per hour because we have, once again, a 4-game tick clock going here. Turn on the 4-game tick clock, and as long as we feed that with bone meal, that's going to make us 18,000 yellow per hour. I mean, yellow is very important. Yellow is very important. Yellow is very important. And then here, once again, which is the same thing with the hopper minecart, where it is actually on top of both of these hoppers. So both of these hoppers are able to take it out, and then it can take out at 2 times hopper speed. This one is for crops. Again, there are much more compact micro farms when you're using, observers and sticky pistons that can do that much easier. But what we have here is each crop that we plant. So let's say we're using carrots. We can use this with wheat or potatoes as well. Let me just take out some carrots. When you plant it and then you use bone meal on it, it will grow a stage and sometimes grow more than one stage. But it is a chance that it's only going to grow one stage per bone meal. Let me see if I can get that to happen here. There we go. We only got one stage of growth. So what we have here is we have, it's kind of a clock basically. So we turn on our 4-game tick clock here that is going to activate this dispenser to shoot out bone meal at our crops every 4-game ticks. And then we have this system here that's going to push this block back and forth and limit how often this signal can come through. And that's going to give it enough time for it to be bone mealed 4 times, and then the piston is going to break it. If we push the piston fast enough, that means we're not going to actually break the farmland. So we can see here, if I just quick pulse that piston, the farmland stays farmland. If I extended pulse it, then that turns into dirt. So that's why we need to make sure that we don't have too long of a signal coming into here. So we monostabled it again. But let me go ahead and turn this on. So we can see that block is getting shoved back and forth, shoved back and forth. This repeater is then taking that signal and putting it through that block, and it can only pick that up because once again we have this on a delay, basically at the right timing to give us enough time for those 4 bone meals. So I just need to place the carrots here. It's going to bone meal and grow them. It's going to spit carrots out, so I as the player will have time to pick them up. But when my inventory is full, then they're going to go into this hopper system right here. I'm going to turn this back on, and we can see we can do the same thing with wheat as well. And there we get our wheat in there. Now, like I said before, this is made with cobblestone. There's some dirt there. I really only did it just so I could see the different places where things needed to be. This can be out of any solid block. In fact, a lot of these don't even need to be solid blocks. This down here, for example, could be slabs because that's not actually needing to power anything. It's just supporting a redstone line. So yeah, if you've got like leftover diorite from your mining session, or you went looking for diamonds in the deep slate area, you've got that. Planks from chopping trees, or maybe bamboo planks, hint hint, you can do that there. And so you could theoretically just build this out of anything. Yeah, that looks good. Next up here, we have kelp. Kelp, this one was kind of fun to figure out because the problem is in order to bone meal kelp, you need to have some water above it. Doesn't need to be a water source. It can be flowing water, but it has to have some water above it. And the piston would actually punch that out. So initially I started out by doing the whole tower of it, but then you have problems with, kelp can get stuck underneath. So what I did is we're basically doing an 8-game tick clock here. And the reason this is so funky, and it has 2 clocks on each side, is because the problem with these monostable signals here is the sand takes some time to fall. So once it's actually up in the air, it doesn't fall right away. And that was a bad example there. Let's put it there. So sand actually takes a little bit to fall. So it takes that time to fall down back onto the piston, where it's then able to have another signal sent through. Now this one right here just pops up to keep the clock going, but these here are going to go back and forth. So these will alternate, just to give the sand enough time to fall down to be able to go back in that monostable signal. Once again, we have hoppers feeding into these. So this would be 18K bone meal that's required for it. Not required. Again, you can put in 2K bone meal per hour here. It just means you're going to get out 2K kelp per hour. So these ones, you're going to get out what you put in. But none of them are dependent on having that amount of bone meal. So what we want to do is basically we need to set off the piston. We need to wait for water to flow down from this waterlogged chest right here. We've waterlogged the chest so that items don't fly up too far and start glitching out. But then we need to have the water flow down, and then we can actually dispense onto the kelp and then have the bone meal grow it. Obviously, pistons are going to break that water, so we need to make sure we have time to flow down, and that's why we're doing 2 modules here to get 18K per hour, because this is going to be 8 game ticks each. Let me go ahead and turn this on. We're going to see what's going to happen is this is going to turn on the clocks here. Like I said, they're going back and forth. So we can see the other one is kicking off right as that one's about to drop. So I've slowed down the game so that we can see that here, but that signal is going to come through on each side. We can see with just enough time. If we were trying to use this on one clock doing this, the sand wouldn't come down fast enough for us to be able to do that. So we have 2 slower clocks basically that are just alternating which order they go in. And we can just barely see that water just barely has enough time to flow down. And the kelp is actually getting generated in the same tick that the piston is pushing, so we don't even see the kelp plant grow. I'm going to go down to tick rate 1, 20 times as slow. And we still didn't see the kelp grow there. But we're getting kelp that comes out. We let it get pushed out past these fences, to these fence gates. So there's enough room that the piston doesn't interfere with it falling. So it's now out of the way. If there is any kelp that does somehow fall down into the water, just because of a random direction that it goes, it will float back up and then eventually be able to get pushed back out by the pistons. And then it just falls onto these 2 hoppers here. And once again, we have 2 hoppers so we can stabilize that input. We can see there was an item that was stuck in there, but it gets pushed out. And then we get our 18k kelp per hour. Once again, remember, this circuitry could be much more compact using observers, but that's not the idea of this. The idea was having some fun and interest without using those nether materials, which really kind of put a wrench in the game plan. So I had a blast doing this. Just don't think that I'm recommending that this is the best circuitry in the world, because next up, we have a Propagule farm. So we have 2.25k Propagule per hour. Propagule we're going to obviously need because we're going to have the Mangrove farm at the end of the video. But this generates based on bone mealing a mangrove leaf block. And then a little tiny baby Propagule pops out of the bottom. But then it needs 4 more bone meal in order to be turned into a full Propagule before we can break it and get one to drop. So we actually need 5 of them. So this probably could be sped up a little bit, but all I've done is I took the idea of the crop farm that we were doing with the piston going back and forth. I extended this delay on the back so that instead of being fired off every 4 times, it's fired off every 8 times. So like I said, we need to do 5 bone meal cycles here to get our Propagule, 1 for the leaf, and then 4 for the Propagule. So that means that there's 2 that are going to be lost, but we don't waste any bone meal because the dispenser just fails. It doesn't try and use up the extra bone meal. So we can have this and, still be just fine on our bone meal input, but then we get our Propagules out of it. So I'm turning that on so we can see it operating. Again, same concept, torch burnout clock goes into this system, which then cuts it off every other time. Then the way that these repeaters work with the signal coming in is if they're on that power or depower state, they don't take another signal in. And so then we're going every only, like I said, 8 bone meal cycles. So you can see the Propagule sits there for a second and then gets broken and picked up by the hopper. But again, that means that we can just reuse that same kind of system and we don't have to do the other system where we're like counting to 5, like I talked about in the counting video, which again would be nice. But like I pointed out in that video, let me turn this off again. Running at that speed, running at 4 game ticks, piston feed tape would have difficulty keeping up with that. Now let's get meta and let's farm dirt cheap. So I'm sure, many of you have heard about the dirt farms that use azalea to produce the dirt. It spits out the rooted dirt that it makes from moss. I'm sure many of you know this. We talked about this with bone meal already. You could turn stone into moss, and then that moss can have a chance to grow azalea trees on it, or azalea bushes, When you grow those up into trees, that'll grow into a tree, and then the moss block actually converts to rooted dirt. If you use a hoe on rooted dirt, then it becomes regular dirt, and in fact, it gives you some roots. So if you're a decorator and you like building, weird looking things, I have no idea what this could be used for in decorating. Or you can save the rooted dirt, and if you want to have an area in your build that you want to look like dirt, say maybe you've got like an area where you got some planters going on the outside of a house, you don't ever want that to turn to grass, but you want to have grass next to it. So that's what this system is doing. Again, there are other designs out there that are going to get much better rates than this. The rates on this are not great. So this is more of a proof of concept. I don't know if I actually recommend building this unless you really like this idea. You really want a dirt farm. You don't want to go to the nether because this is not very much output. We can see we're only going to get about 220 rooted dirt per hour and 220 oak logs per hour. Not much for needing a 9k bone meal hour to produce. But as you can see, we got a few versions here. You can also take this and turn that rooted dirt into mud automatically, have that mud turn into clay, and then you can produce clay. So this system that we're going to be looking at right here gives you the 220 oak logs per hour. About 60 mud makes it through that doesn't convert to clay, but then about 160 clay blocks per hour. Again, I'm not really going to be using this as like, my audition for Psy. Like, look at the crazy farms I can build. I got 60 mud per hour. But But this uses 0 sticky pistons, 0 nether materials, 0 silk touch materials, and it was a lot of fun to do. So like I said, this one is only going to need 9k per hour. I'm just going to be covering this side over here. The only difference on this side is we're going to have a dispenser shoot water bottles at this dirt as it comes through and turn it into mud. And then we just have a dispenser that's filled up with empty bottles, the hopper facing into it filled up with empty bottles. We could, put some random items in here. Then if we just set it off once, we know we're always going to get a new water bottle coming out of here, and we can then just have the empty glass bottle then go down into there because now it's changed item types. But you can see I put a hopper minecart in there because technically there is no guarantee that stone is not going to come through this. So in practice, I did see maybe 2 or 3 stone per hour coming through just because of the way that bone mealing moss blocks works. It is kind of random, so there is still a chance of getting some stone in. This system handles the stone just fine. It still moves it just like the dirt and blows it up and puts it in a collection. This would also do the same, but then eventually you would start running out of bottles because if it tries to shoot out a bottle onto stone, it just drops out the water bottle. So we have a hopper minecart here so you can collect it, but eventually, like I said, if you go past that 62 that's down here, then you're going to get a water bottle coming into here. It's just going to make a mess. So I'm going to go ahead and just clear out the leaves here so we can see what's going on. This is what we have going on. Again, there are designs out there that are going to use much more, but we have 4 dispensers here that we can generate moss and then have a chance for those dispensers to hit that bush if it grows in one of these 4 sectors into a tree. It is pretty good at getting those bushes to turn into trees. From what I saw, it was like 98% of the time. There were a couple of edge cases where it didn't, for some reason, have enough time to turn into one. But basically, we're going to use an 8-game tick clock. We're going to let it burn out, so we just hit it for 8 pieces of bone meal. And so those 8 pieces of bone meal have a really good shot at getting it turned into a tree. That's going to then, like I said, convert this to dirt and put a log right there. It's going to grow up into a tree, but we don't care about the rest of the tree. In order to then replace this, what we're doing is we have a couple of stone generators here that are pushing stone in to break those moss blocks and push out the rooted dirt blocks. So we'll then have 3 stone lined up here. And we need to get that log out of the way because if we try and bone meal this when there's something on top of it, it's not going to turn to bone meal. It's just going to turn to stone. So what we have is there's going to be a little loop of redstone here. And not only do these pistons push out any extra like carpets that we're going to have left over. So these pistons will push the blocks from this corner in on top of these pistons, and these pistons push up. And then this side goes off. These push in, and then this pushes up so that we can clear out any logs that are in there. And then, like I said, if it's moss, it just breaks and it drops. We have some hopper minecarts here to help pick up most of the drops. There are still some that are going to kind of go their own random directions, but that's fine because we're really only after the dirt. So the dirt is going to get pushed out the side here, and then we need to get it to a blast chamber. So that we then push it up this way. Here, we're going to merge it into a single stream. This gets not as compact when you don't have, observers. Observers get real easy to do this with because you just like observe that it's moving and then have a piston push it off of that. So yeah, but again, we're going off of not that, so we have it pushed into the stream, then it gets pushed over to this way, and then we're splitting it back into 2 streams so that we can send TNT right down the middle and blow that up. And we're doing the same thing with the logs. So again, I said the logs get pushed up. Logs get pushed up here instead of bothering with turning them into 1 stream because we could potentially have 4 total logs. So it is possible to get 4 trees grown, 1 in each corner. So we're going to have these 2 logs pushed over. It would be like that. Those logs are going to push up. And then we don't want to slow this down too much. So then we just very quickly, we push in the next logs and then the next logs get pushed up. So all we have here is these are not 0 tick because you do need a sticky piston for 0 tick. But they are fast tick. So these are still going to be able to get the piston head out of the way fast enough that when, this cycle goes off, pushes them in front and it pushes, that cycle is still going to be able to push in and push up before it goes again. We have over here, same thing. It's going to push down so that we can get closer to that blast chamber. Everything goes into blast chamber. What we have here is we have smart pistons on the end. And so if enough dirt comes in, I forgot what the word was there, it's going to push off just one side. So we can see that side's not pushed down. Fortunately, in the center here, we only have 1 redstone dust to work off of. So if we get oak log on either side, boom, it's going to push down both sides. pushes those down towards this water stream. And then what we have is, once again, we have the circuit where we're going to count, only going to dispense TNT every 4 times. So that's enough to keep this clear from getting down to push limit, but that saves you on TNT. So instead of going off every time and having to use up that much TNT, it's going to be a lot less. Now, I did say that I was going to talk about some TNT dupers, and we'll get to that over there. If you are good with TNT duping, they're going to be right over there, and we'll go over those in a little bit. For now, I want to finish up with this one. So we do have right here, we have the 9K bone meal input. You can either do that with a water stream that feeds into this hopper right here, or we can do that with these chest lines. This got real tricky because we actually have to use some kind of wide outreaching hopper lines in order to reach. This first layer here where the bush is going to grow, where that first log would grow, we can have stuff right up next to it. But everything else, we need to have that extra little bit of 3x3 space in order for it to be able to grow. So if we had a hopper like right here, for example, feeding in there, this would never grow. So this just feeds over the bone meal. This can run just fine. It's actually a little under 9,000 per hour. I think it was probably about 8,000 per hour, but you want to make sure you've got enough to keep it running. Because if you don't, potentially this dispenser down here could then run out of bone meal to start making more moss, and all you're going to see is you're going to start having stone coming through instead of dirt, because we don't get a lot of stone coming through. Like I said, usually you're going to get those 6 moss blocks, but sometimes you're not. So those just get broken instead of getting pushed through. Like I said, the hopper minecarts pick those up. And this is actually, I didn't realize this. In order to get stone to turn into moss when it's elevated like this, that stone block actually needs to be supported. So I'm pretty sure the code is doing something like sending it through blocks like that. We need to support it somehow. So it's just having kind of any solid block underneath there, or it doesn't even have to be solid. It could be a glass block, something like that. If we put that under there, then we bone meal, and now that's going to turn into moss. So we can see here, there's a composter, but that's not a solid block, and that bone meal is just fine. Even partial blocks like rails count. So I put that there and moss that, boom. That's considered supported how? Whatever. That means that we can just put rails directly under where those moss blocks are, and then put hopper minecarts on those rails, and we don't have to worry about the hopper minecarts popping out or anything like that, getting unaligned. Yeah, so that'll just pick up. Those go into a composter here. In this actual scenario, I just have these shooting out of this dropper, which is actually full up because I was using some carpet rules to do some testing earlier. That just shoots out onto the cactus and destroys it. There's no reason for you not to send this back into a storage or into a chest. I just once again wanted to show that you can use cactus as an alternative to destroying items. So all that stuff that gets picked up from what's being broken then goes back into this hopper line right here, feeds right into this composter, and gets turned back into bone meal. This is where I was talking about having that counter. So this counts to 3 because once again we have those 2 stone pushers and 3 blocks each that they need to fill. If I ran it for 4, then every single time you'd get at least 1 stone block coming out. We'd really, increase the amount of TNT that we need to use, and that would just be kind of a pain. So this piston feed tape, it is an even number of blocks. 2 of them are redstone blocks. So as this pushes around, 1 on each cycle, it'll count to 3. So every 3 times is when we then want to go ahead and activate the system to run the pistons and then actually do the bone mealing. So let's turn this on and see this run. Once again, we have the same kind of idea where we have this little clock starting that's using that sand to get a quick monostable signal in, so that we just have a nice little quick clock here. We can see we don't have time for that stone to be generated, and then it gets pushed in, breaks all that moss, and there we go. We have the pistons firing, and just in time the firing cycle is done for it to be all bone mealed back into more moss. And let's see if we can actually see an azalea grow here. There we go, we saw it grow. That's going to push in the log, push it up in the system, and that can just keep repeating. Now again, you can see how slow this is going to go. Wow, that's rude. You can see how slow this is going to go. These are not incredible rates, but at the same time, the idea of this is if you have the bone meal, so if you make a bone meal farm and you make this can run infinitely. You don't need to do more work to keep it running. You just make sure that this is filled unless you are doing the manual TNT. So let's turn this off and make free TNT using a snowman. So again, full disclosure, this is not my design at all. Literally the only thing I did was change it to dirt instead of the smooth stone. The rest of it is not mine at all. I'm going to link down the video description. Scorpio did a video that kind of went over these TNT duper systems, and this is one by Afferent Neuron. But what it does is it uses no observers, no sticky pistons, no slime, no coral fans, nothing like that. And it uses the snow block that the snow golem generates to update the TNT while it's in that list, and that's what actually does the duping for it. So if I was to do this right here, we can see that's actually going to dupe the TNT, and I'm going to slow this down. So what we're going to see is first this is going to get pushed over in a position. That smart piston is then going to push it back, but that TNT is going to get an update from this snow breaking. So we can see that snow broke for just a brief moment there. So that TNT gets an update from it breaking, and I'm not going to go again into the super details of this. If you want to know more about it, check out the videos by Myron on TNT duping. But we can make as much TNT as we want using just snow and a pumpkin. And if you want, you can get the pumpkin back. Sorry. So I'm not going to talk too much detail about the way this works, but all we need to know is we just need to have a long enough signal for this to be able to cut off. So just a short pulse wouldn't actually dupe any TNT. It wouldn't actually do anything. Because what we have is we have this block that's going to get pushed over here, and then it's going to cut off this redstone line. So now the redstone points into that note block and into this piston, but the change in the shape of the redstone doesn't actually update the blocks. So it needs to give them another update, and then that piston is what actually gives them an update. It's a whole thing. So if we have a long enough signal going in, we don't need to do it with an observer. We can do it in one of our cheapskate ways, either just doing a button or one of our regular monostable circuits, and then we just extend it a little bit. So after a monostable circuit, we can still extend it out a little bit by using repeaters here to lengthen the signal enough. And so in front, we have the versions that are using the TNT dispensing, and in the back are versions that are the TNT dupers with the snowmen in there. The only other difference, all this part of the farm is the same. The only other difference is back here, we've taken out those counters because we don't really need to count a duped TNT. You know, if it's just going to dupe for us each time, then we don't have anything to worry about. So I'm just going to go ahead and slam some in here. TNT just goes in there. Boom. Theoretically, we don't really need this water here. I just added it because sometimes it's nice to have when you're working on something in case you accidentally set something off. So if the TNT explodes in the water, it's not a big deal. And then again, as long as you've got these same timings on here, this water won't flow out long enough to actually hurt anything, but I've still got an open fence gate there just in case. So there's a couple things you can take out if you know what you're doing. If you're not too sure, just go ahead and leave that in because it's not going to hurt anything while it's operating, as long as that fence gate stays open, and if not, it's just going to blow up in the water and you'll be fine. So in this version with the duper, it wouldn't actually get this low because it's going to set off a piece of TNT each time it goes through. Now, I did mention you got to make sure you're not sending in signals too fast on this one because it does need a little bit of time to reset. So it's not like the slime blocks with the Coral Fans version where you can just, send it back and forth every couple of ticks. This one needs to actually have some time to do some piston resets and everything like that. But again, with the speed of this that we saw, it's never going to kick off that fast. I mean, first of all, we have these cycles here that can only produce a maximum of 2 dirt. Even if you got all of this filled out, every single corner, and then it would produce dirt to go up there, that's still only 4 dirt that's coming through. So that can't even fill up this, 5 set of pistons to push down. So we don't have to worry about that on either of these. And, again, you're going to get some randomization with this. We're not doing anything really ideal to increase the rates that we would get from mud because it is a random tick. I thought about extending this out more so that this had longer to go, like taking this feed tape and kind of snaking it around a bit. But really at that point, you could just take the mud and you could put it in a converter yourself. Or like I said, at this point, it's free. So if you set this up with Bonemeal feeding into it from one of the Bonemeal designs and then just run this, it requires no player input to come back to if you're using the dupers. And that version just requires the TNT, and it's not using that much TNT. Maybe like every 2 minutes or something like that, or 3 minutes. You've got to have this kick off 4 times. And from those speeds we were seeing, that's not very much. Okay, and as they say, save the first and the last for the best. That's what we've done. This is really based around the Bonemeal farm. That's what started this video in this project. And the Mangrove farm is what we've ended up at. So you can see there's 3 versions here. This one in the back, I'm going to get to talking about. This is not functional. Don't build this one. And then we have 2 side by side here. These 2 in the front, they're the same thing, just that this one is with the dispenser TNT. This is going to use about 90 TNT an hour, so really not much. But this one is a duper, so you really don't have to worry about it. This is another one where I have to disclose technically we're using some sticky pistons in here. I'll get to why in just a moment, but there are 4 sticky pistons in this build. That's all the expensive materials. So if this is a situation where you're trying to get mangrove and you don't have access to slime for some weird modded reason, unfortunately this is not going to get you there because it does need those 4 sticky pistons. So now that I've done my disclosure, this is, again, one of the ones we're just going to feed in with Bonemeal and the Propagules. That's nice and easy. We can get that from the Propagule farm right over there. So we could even have that hooked up, running, and have Bonemeal come to that first, and then have Bonemeal come to here second to make sure that the player is always filled up on Propagules, or you could just run the Propagules ahead of time and have them come to the player. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this mangrove tree so we can see what's going on. So this right here is all we need in order to farm mangrove. Now, I've seen some mangrove designs out there that are very efficient on getting mangrove. This is one of those ones where, again, we're going to drop some efficiency, but it's not bad. It's still 2,200 logs per hour and 733 roots per hour. And like I said, only the 4 slime balls. So there are versions out there that will use flying machines so that can extract much larger sections of the tree. We are just going to be pushing out these 4 blocks right here. And this is why we needed those sticky pistons. The way that the mangrove trees work when they grow is you take a Propagule and you Bonemeal it. Once again, we don't have to worry about anything on this bottom layer because the bottom layer doesn't count. So that's why we can have planks and stuff in here. We can have a dispenser there. We can have these trap doors so that the player's view doesn't get blocked. But when you plant the Propagule, it is going to look to see how many supporting blocks it has on this kind of cross shape here in the 4 cardinal directions. And that's how it will pick what size tree it can possibly be. So that's how it will pick its maximum height. But you'll also notice we have cobblestone here. That does not count towards a block that is acceptable for the mangrove tree. So what we're doing is we are forcing a very specific height of mangrove tree. Basically, the game is always going to build up a sequence of roots, and these will be in random shapes. I'm just kind of doing them in this shape here. But we're always going to then have a mangrove root right here. So it's going to see this cobblestone block and say that this can be the bottom of the tree. That will start on a mangrove root right there. And then we get 3 logs on top of that from the tree, and then it can grow a little bit above that. However, if we have these sticky pistons too high, and I still haven't been able to see exactly why this is happening. So if we have those sticky pistons too high, even 1 higher, then suddenly it says, you know what, I don't have enough room to grow into a mangrove. And it's probably has to do with, like I said, the way that it's picking out how to do that. It's probably doing the arc first, and it's saying, I don't have room to reach the bottom of the arc all the way up here. And so adding more sticky pistons, at least in this design, maybe someone can find a better concept for this. I worked on this for longer than I care to admit, but it's functional. So we've got to make sure that we don't have those sticky pistons up there, and then it can generate. Now, I was messing around, as you can see over here, with adding in more. So I had this entire stack here made of sticky pistons so that it would push out some extra roots that might generate inside of there, as well as kind of came up a little bit further and stuck the pistons out so that it could push out like these blocks right here that extend onto the branches. However, turning it into a block stream because it's much more expensive with the number of pistons that we need. Obviously, once again, we're using more sticky pistons over there. We have all these pistons down here. And yeah, you can see the extra results we're getting. So out of all this right here, which is our normal 4 blocks, 3 logs and 1 root, this is what came out. So I just decided it wasn't worth it to continue on this path with this whole mess of pistons and this extra redstone dust and everything like that, when we can do this consistently. So this will consistently build us this 1 root and 3 logs. So after that Propagule grows, we're going to have those 3 in there, and we're just kind of ignoring everything else. You can see we've just got all those extra leaves and everything. We're not worrying about collecting the Propagule that's building there, because again, we're planning on using that farm for it. I guess you could add some hoppers under this, and some Propagule will pop off, but it's not going to be nearly enough to keep it sustained. So then we just push out this section, which then reopens this up to have another root generate there and another 3 logs on top of it. We just keep going in that cycle. So it is really important that this is logs in here, because this, starting at this block, again, the bottom block doesn't matter, but starting this block, the tree is going to consider those as blocking it unless they're logs. Then it says, oh, it's part of a tree. It's fine. I can grow there. And then we have the cobblestone at this exact height so that we can, like I said, make sure that the roots generate there consistently and can push out. So the logs as they're coming out, these slabs aren't necessary. I just, as you can see over here, I added the slabs so that I didn't get vines coming down there and I could see what was going on. By all means, you don't have to actually build these slabs, but I'll leave them in case you want to see where I put those. Then it's all based off of the same cycle timer. It gets pushed out over here, and then what we ended up getting is we end up having 2 block streams here that are 2 blocks wide coming down under the TNT, so that once again in this version we can use the TNT dispenser, and we have that on a counter, so it's going to set off every 2. Or this one we're using the Snowman TNT Duper, and that way we're just, we took the counter out because we just want to set it off each time. Once again, we know that we have to have that block coming in 4 times before it gets pushed out, so even if it gets set off every time. We still have a timer down here for actually growing the trees and pushing those out. So unlike the birch tree farm, this is not based on detecting when the tree grows. We're just working off of a timer. So this little clock right here, just this repeater clock, is what's going to run the entire tree farm. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. We're going to see that it's going to start getting us a mono signal output out of there. And we can see first thing that's happening is we're turning on one of those torch burnout clocks or game tick clock here. This is where the bone meal is coming in, so we can send in bone meal this way. And it reaches this dropper right here, which feeds up into that dropper and then this dispenser. So we need a player to place Propagule right there. And that's why we have this piston going. So we can see the Propagules are getting dispensed, so a player can do this in survival. But to use it, we just step on this piston here, and then when we're pushed up, we want to look at that block, and I'm going to have to turn on my fast block placement for this, and start planting and hold on the right mouse button. We're going to see that sometimes it's not going to grow, so you can see I'm not actually placing a Propagule there. But the reason that I have the player going up and down is because sometimes it will grow almost instantaneously. And what we don't want is we don't want to have it waste by having it grow up inside of those logs while they're getting pushed. And so that's why I have the player coming down every once in a while, so that if the Propagule does grow in there, we're not then getting extra growth that is not going to do anything. So we're not wasting Propagules. If you're not worried about wasting Propagules, if you hook that Propagule farm up to this and have it running constantly, by all means, you can just have the player always standing here. So just replace that piston head with a block, have the player always standing there. And then you will increase the rates a little bit, but not much. I think it was like 2,500 when I did that. So this way, we're just not having to worry about wasting as much. We can save those Propagules. Because these Propagules that get spit out that don't get picked up by the player, we can't see them right now because I'm in creative and just picking them up so fast. Sorry, if I go into survival, we can see if I'm not picking up a Propagule, then it just goes down into that hopper, gets recycled into the system. Again, we have these trapdoors here just so it doesn't obstruct my view. We have this one so that we don't get a root growing there and blocking my view of it. We have this one here so that, like a vine, we can see right there, a vine is coming down. We're going to have a vine come down this way and grow in front of my view of that block. And we can see they're just going to get pushed out when they grow. So it's not detection based. It's all on that timer. And we can see we're not going to get one for every cycle, but at the same time, this was much easier to deal with than having the detection, because then in order to do detection, we need to get some redstone up in there. But mangrove trees are much pickier about what's in their radius when they grow. So I figured, that's pretty good. 4 slime balls for 2,200 mangrove an hour. You need to build with mangrove. This is nice and easy to run. And then all I'm doing is, you could do this with a carpet bot too. Just put the carpet bot there. And again, if you got a bone meal farm and a Propagule farm, just leave it running. Come back whenever you want. And then again, like I said, this one is dispensing TNT. So you would need to craft TNT to actually keep this one going infinitely. It's not that much TNT. But this one over here uses the duper that doesn't use, like I said, any of the other materials. So this one is still cheap, only uses the 4 slime balls. It's not a complete cheapskate build, but it's still cheap. So I definitely proud of this one, because up until this, everything I saw to farm mangrove was either manual or a bunch of flying machines, which those are the ones I ended up building when I needed one. But this is fun. I'm really happy with this. I'm really happy with this. So these were definitely a lot of fun. I got a few closing thoughts here. First thing is, I did clear out the extra blocks from these farms that you don't need, so that if you want to take a schematic, you don't, think that you have to collect 20,000 vines in order to get that up or something like that. Another thing to note is, especially if you have world edit, feel free to change these to whatever block types you want. You can see, like, right behind my head there, I used like granite, diorite, birch planks, mangrove planks. That was nothing. You just need to make sure that, solid blocks are solid blocks and planks are planks. You can use whatever you want. You could use whatever type of planks you got. You could use your cobblestone for your mining session, your deep slate for your mining session, or literally dirt. All of these could have their solid blocks replaced with dirt. Should be fine on the bone meal farm, but maybe just stick with something that can't be turned into moss on that one. But for the rest of these will be ready for you in the world download. I did put, you saw these lime concrete blocks in there. Those are just to mark where the on-off switches were. I realized after I was going through and prepping this video that I used levers a lot to power repeaters. And so that got kind of confusing. That is this lever just to power something, or is it not meant to be there? So the on-off switches are where the lime concrete blocks are. And I hope you enjoy it. Let me know down in the comments if you are watching this long. This is going to be a longer video. Put down in the comments that you're a winner, and that's how you'll claim your prize. Disclaimer, there actually isn't a prize, but you'll look cool. So I'll catch you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.